look, we can't emphasize this enough. If we want entry-level buyers, we need to create an atmosphere where it's easy, a little easier to do it.
This is Las Vegas Real Estate Now with local real estate expert Harvey Blankfeld.
One of the things you want to talk about today, and I think this is a good topic, is about how housing has become so unaffordable here, particularly for entry-level buyers. And I think that's a real issue. We've talked about it a lot lately.
Yeah.
But you're seeing it. You're seeing the data that supports the idea that the average income doesn't make it easy for people to buy a home or get into home buying.
Yeah, it's a real equilibrium shift, because if you make the medium income as a household in Las Vegas, you can't afford the median house.
Right.
And so when those two graphs kind of cross each other, it goes away from, people who are on the lower end of the spectrum financially to you have working class people, 2 incomes, a teacher, a firefighter. These people can't afford homes anymore. And
Yeah.
I always kind of go back to this whole idea. I'm going to get really philosophical here, but I go to the idea of the social contract of Western society. And part of it is being able to purchase land and be a part of land ownership and home ownership.
Yeah.
And like we were talking before we started, building that generational wealth. So it seems like that social contract has been broken.
Yeah.
Where it's like, if you work hard and I'm a firefighter and my wife's a teacher and we work hard and we save up some money, we buy a house, and then our kids get that house, right? It seems like that's gone. And I think that's what people are really kind of worried about right now.
I couldn't agree more. And the other thing we talked about, and I know you mentioned it in your outline, is the idea that Wall Street's buying so many houses, and they're even building homes, brand new homes, specifically for rentals.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And my comment has been this: is that I hate to see Wall Street turning residential housing into a commodity. I just hate that. I really don't want to see the big corporations take away that opportunity from Mr. and Mrs. Fireman and teacher. I don't want to see them take that, because they're taking that away from them.
They don't care.
They don't. They're
It's
all
all about the bottom line.
simple motive is profit. We understand
Yeah.
that, and that's capitalism. I'm not against that, but I just don't want them to take that away from the individuals. And they're seeing an opportunity and they're doing it. That happened during the housing crisis. They realized, oh gee, we can get all these houses for cheap.
Yeah.
And then we can either lease them out or flip them.
Yeah.
And now they continue to do it. And I don't know how to fix that. I mean, that's up to I think the government has to do something to fix it. Maybe they just impose I've talked about maybe some kind of a surplus tax. If you own so many homes or more, you got to pay double your tax or something like that. And let the federal government to kind of dissuade these large companies from buying so many residential properties. And maybe that affects the price of homes in a negative way.
Yeah, because it would probably make them.
I'm kind of okay with that to the extent that it gets it back to the hands of the individual buyer.
Yeah, I think I agree with everything what you're saying, and Wall Street getting into the housing game is clearly not a good thing for the average consumer. But one of the things that we've lost, I think, is that there used to be a marker. Housing used to be a marker of like the health of the middle class.
Correct.
If housing was healthy, then the middle class was healthy. And that was a good way to say, okay, the economy is doing pretty well because the middle class is doing okay.
Right.
And it's pretty clear the middle class is suffering right now when it comes to housing. So we've lost that marker of, how are we doing in terms of the middle class? And that used to be a great way to say, well, the middle class is struggling with this, but they're all still buying homes, right?
Yeah.
And now they're not buying homes anymore. And I think that's a real problem. And Wall Street is Wall Street, right? Like, I do subscribe to the idea that we do live in a capitalist society, but at some point there needs to be checks and balances, because the average mom and pop can't compete with Wall Street. And I saw this going up to North Las Vegas, and I talked to people, and they said they would have a certain amount of dollars saved up to buy a house for $300,000 or $350,000. That's what these Wall Street companies are targeting, is the starter homes, right?
Right.
And so what would happen is that the Wall Street-backed hedge funds would buy these homes using algorithms. So they would drastically overpay because they knew that they could get that rent back in 2 or 3 years, right? So it's just, part of me is like, yeah, I understand it, and this is what makes, Western society so great, is capitalism and the free market and all that, but it seems like it's run amok a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, we're saying the same thing. I mean, I think we're definitely in agreement on this issue. And it's really about trying to create some kind of a structure that makes it a little less desirable for them. Somehow, basically saying to them, listen, guys, leave these for the little guy. Let's hands off. Go, make your money any way you like, but lay off the residential housing.
Well, and just like Patrick said, when they overpay,
Yeah.
It makes it even harder for a
Yeah.
first-time home buyer to get, because the prices have gone up. That's
Yep.
a new comp. That's where the numbers are. And our median price goes up.
And existing homeowners might think, well, good, this doesn't really affect me. It does. Because if we don't bring people at an entry level, you're not going to have anybody to sell to when they
Yeah.
want to move up. They're not there. It's if corporations own all the entry level housing, there's no buyers for your next step house. There's no buyers out there. The hardest purchase for anyone is that first one. That's the one you got to write the check.
Yeah.
After that, you're just taking equity from one house and moving it to another. But if there's nobody in that first level, if we diminish that group of entry level buyers, guess what? As a homeowner, you've just diminished your potential buyers later on. It's just
Yeah.
you're just taking away the base.
You mean for the move up? Like
Yeah, the move up buyer disappears. There's no move up buyer. If there's nobody to start with, there's no move up.
Yeah.
So we need that. We need those entry level buyers in there, unless we start seeing Wall Street buy move up houses too. And I don't think we're going to see that. I don't.
Yeah.
Or if we do, unfortunately, the prices aren't going to go up. They're going to flatten
Right.
out. So it is an issue.
North Las Vegas is kind of the epicenter for it. It's it blew my mind when I went up there and we saw some of the build to rent communities for American homes for rent.
Yeah.
And it was just cookie cutter street after cookie
Right.
cutter street.
Yeah.
And we talked to people. We talked to a lot of people. Me and Jimmy Romo, and the stories were just, I got evicted, I moved, and they become sort of perpetual renters.
Yeah.
And then you would see U-Haul trucks, and then you would see another house with like 8 cars on the lawn.
Yeah.
And I was just like, this seems like a dystopia, right?
Yeah.
Like if this spreads, this is what everything will be like.
Yeah, I'd hate to see that happen, but yeah, we're heading in that direction, and it's just look, we can't emphasize this enough. If we want entry level buyers, we need to create an atmosphere where it's a little easier to do it. Patrick, you had an article recently also, and I think this gets back to the idea of entry level housing and BLM land, and I think
Oh yeah.
this was a good article. I thought it was well written, and I think it was important. And again, I love the headline is that it's basically is a land crisis, and you mentioned before how the governor's reached out to the president a couple times,
Yeah.
and basically said, "Gee, can you help cut some of the red tape here?" And I think that was really important stuff. And you spoke with Stephen Haynes, who's with Colliers, and he basically enumerated the challenges that are brought before to try to get BLM to release land. And
Yeah.
I never knew this, but it has to be the process is long and aggravated. It's just crazy. There's so
really
many
bad.
steps.
Yeah. I think the
What are those steps?
Well, let's talk about that.
Yeah. So basically, if let's say you want to buy a piece of land in Las Vegas, and it's most likely going to be BLM land because they control the majority of it. That's one thing I think people should know is that it's a real anomaly here. Most states are not like this. Like we're one of the. I think we are the top state in terms of federal land ownership.
88% of Clark County
Yeah. So that's
Is owned.
owned by BLM.
Yeah. And you have to think of the federal government, they're not out to make money and they're not part of the private sector. So speed is not
Not
really
their
part
thing.
of their vocabulary.
Right.
And I understand this is, government is a bureaucracy and it's supposed to sort of run a little bit slower than the private sector. But from what Stephen and I talked to a couple other people were telling me was
Right.
that from start to finish, by the time you bid on the land to the time that you can put shovels in the ground, we're talking like well over a year, 2 years, 3 years. And every day you're losing money on that. And every time you have to get a permit or a site permit from the county or one of the municipalities, you're adding more time onto that, more money. And so he's saying it's like it almost doesn't make financial sense for land buyers to buy land.
Yeah.
And that is essentially what's driving, the residential crisis and on the commercial side as well. So,
There is an entity that basically gets in the middle of this. It's called AVSO. Is that right? Yes.
yeah, it's within the Department of the
Here it is.
Interior. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
the Appraisals and Valuation Service Office.
Yeah.
And I was amazed that they actually got back to me when I reached out to them
Oh,
for
you
a
did?
quote. Yeah,
Yeah.
to get a quote from the feds
Yeah.
is usually like pulling teeth.
I can imagine.
But they seem like it was an entity that was created for no actual reason because you would think the Southern Nevada office of the BLM can handle appraisals.
Yeah.
They're based out of here. They know the valley. So somebody wants to buy land in Las Vegas. It goes to the BLM. The BLM sends it to the feds, to the Department of Interior.
Uh-huh.
and then they have to give the appraisal. That seems like a step that you could probably get rid of. I don't know exactly how this all works in terms of like the inner workings and why the Department of Interior would be doing the appraisals. But I would say if you're a local, you should be giving the appraisals, right?
Yeah, I wouldn't want a guy from DC doing appraisals for my listings. I
Right.
don't,
Yeah.
I want to get somebody local here who's seen it, knows it, knows what's going on around it, that type of thing. So it makes perfect sense what you're saying. And that's just one of the steps that happens, and then it goes beyond that. There's step after step after step. And in the article you talked about, there was back in in 1998 they passed something where they basically were saying, well, let's get 21,000 almost 22,000 acres available. But since then, only 2,000 acres have been made available.
Yeah, this the Southern Nevada Land Management Act was passed in 1998, and they knew that this was a problem back then.
Yeah.
So that's why they passed this and said, okay, we need to offload some of this land to the private sector.
Yeah.
And I don't know how long, my math is probably really bad, how long ago 1998 is, but that's like
26 years.
26 years.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Quarter century.
And things slowed down even more when the Department of the Interior got involved. Like it used to be mostly, or I can't remember how far ago, but the local BLM office used to handle it.
Yeah.
So this extra layer of bureaucracy kind of came in, and then numbers dropped down even more. I've spoken to Mike Ford, who's quoted in this article a bunch of times. Mm-hmm. He is probably the most knowledgeable guy that you're ever going to meet because he worked for the BLM.
Oh, okay.
So that was really good. I quoted him for a previous article, and then I went back to him, and he said, this is essentially the bottleneck of all bottlenecks, right?
Yeah.
You can't build homes if you don't have land. You can't build commercial if you don't have land. So.
Indeed. And we're a finite valley here, but we need more land. Our population continues to grow. We're running out of houses. I mean, period. We don't have enough.
Well, I have a question though. Like, so if federal government relinquishes it to the local municipalities, somebody's got to be in charge of controlling growth though, because we don't want to grow too fast.
Well, yeah, I think that there's always other considerations, like water is a consideration.
Exactly.
Other things are considerations, and yet, if we don't do something, you're exacerbating the issue of entry level housing.
True.
You're exacerbating that. You need more product so that the prices are balanced, and so that the market is balanced, and so entry level buyers can buy homes. And so we need more inventory. It was interesting. Yesterday, I was out at a community over at Lake Las Vegas, and it was a senior community, and I saw when it first came up, they had a variety of homes to choose from. Well, they just recently added 3 new homes. I don't know how long ago. I couldn't tell you. Maybe it's been a while since I was out there. But these are all tiny homes. These are like 1,200 square foot homes.
Yeah.
They did that intentionally to bring the price down so people could afford it. And so I think that's what developers and builders need to have an eye for the idea that, hey, we need entry-level buyers back, guys. We need to be able to we need that base built up. I keep going back to this, but it's so important for us to understand it.
I still believe that I talked to Stephen Haynes for this article, and he's really smart too. And he said supply and demand fundamentals still come in.
Sure.
They're not going to develop a commercial site if it doesn't make financial sense, and they don't feel as if they can get tenants. And KB Homes or Lennar are not going to build a bunch of homes in a place if they don't think that they can sell them and rent, or sell them to customers. So this is when you get back, obviously, to the deeper question of capitalism. Is maybe this is where we let the private sector kind of sort it out.
Yeah.
And there's a lot more regulations when it comes to the housing market, when it comes to residential real estate, when it comes to the real estate industry in general.